The tiny survivor in the crashed pod. The storm came without warning. Dark clouds rolled over the forest like waves in the sky, and the wind howled as if something alive was chasing through the trees. Jake had lived in the forest for 2 years, alone ever since he left the noisy city behind. He had seen many storms, but nothing like this one. The sky flashed with green lightning and a loud roar. Not thunder, but something different shook the ground. Jake stepped out of his wooden cabin wearing his thick coat. His eyes scanned the tree line. Something had fallen from the sky. He could feel it in his bones. It wasn't just a storm. Something had crashed. He grabbed his flashlight and axe and walked into the forest, boots sinking in the wet soil. After a short walk, he found it. A glowing silver pod, half buried in mud and broken branches. Steam hissed from its sides and strange blue lights blinked along its surface. It looked like no machine Jake had ever seen. He moved closer. The pod was cracked open, and inside lay something small, something alive. It was a girl, but not a human girl. She was tiny, barely the size of a house cat. Her skin was soft silver, her hair long and shimmering like threads of moonlight. Her eyes were shut tight, and her small body shook from the cold. Her hands had 3 fingers each, and her clothes were made of thin, torn fabric that looked like it came from a dream. Jake froze. This couldn't be real. Was he dreaming? The girl stirred, then opened her eyes slowly. They were bright violet, glowing softly even in the darkness. When she saw Jake, tall, large, and shadowed by the flashlight, she screamed. It was a high-pitched sound like a tiny alarm. She crawled backward inside the pod, pressing herself against the wall. Her chest rose and fell quickly. She was terrified. Jake raised both hands slowly. "It's okay," he said gently. "I won't hurt you." But she didn't understand. Her small voice let out strange words, alien language, fast and trembling. She looked around, searching for escape. But she was too weak, too cold. She collapsed again, her breathing shallow. Jake's heart hurt to see her like that. She wasn't a monster, she wasn't dangerous. She looked like a scared child who had fallen out of the sky. He took off his coat and carefully wrapped it around her. She flinched but didn't resist. Her body was freezing cold like ice. He lifted her gently, holding her as if she were made of glass, and started walking back to his cabin. Inside, he placed her on the couch near the fire and wrapped her in a soft blanket. She looked even smaller now, her silver skin glowing faintly in the firelight. He boiled some water, crushed a soft fruit, and left it on a tiny plate beside her. She didn't move, but her eyes stayed on him, watching. Jake sat on the floor, keeping his distance, hands resting on his knees. "You're safe here," he whispered, even though he knew she didn't understand. "No one's going to hurt you." The storm outside continued to roar, but the cabin was warm and quiet. Time passed slowly. Jake kept the fire going through the night, checking on her every hour. Once he saw her reach out for the fruit but then pull her hand back quickly, eyes locked on him. She was still afraid. Jake sighed and stood. He scribbled something on a piece of paper and placed it beside the food. "Eat if you want. You're safe. I won't hurt you." Then he walked into the next room and closed the door. The alien girl looked at the note, then at the fruit. She touched the edge of the blanket around her. It was soft, warm. Her people had always warned her. Humans were giants, dangerous wild creatures, monsters who would eat anything smaller than them. But this one didn't attack. He didn't cage her. He just gave her warmth, food, and space. Her eyes grew heavy. Her small body relaxed just a little as she pulled the blanket tighter around her. Maybe, just maybe, this giant wasn't a monster. And then, slowly, she closed her eyes again. Not from fear this time, but from sleep. She refused to eat, terrified of becoming the meal. When morning came, the sun barely touched the cabin through the cloudy sky. Jake stepped into the living room, carrying a cup of tea in one hand and a calm look on his face. The small alien girl, still wrapped in the thick blanket, was sitting up now. Her glowing violet eyes locked onto him the moment he entered. She hadn't touched the food. The crushed fruit on the tiny plate remained untouched, and the water in the wooden cup was full. She had stayed awake most of the night. Jake could see. The fear in her eyes hadn't left. He sat down across the room, giving her space, not saying a word at first. She watched his every move, every blink, every breath, as if any sudden gesture would mean danger. Then Jake spoke slowly. "You're still scared," he said, not expecting her to understand. "I get it." The girl shifted under the blanket, gripping its edges tightly in her small hands. She was trembling, not from the cold anymore, but from something deeper, something inside her mind. Jake had seen animals behave like this. Once he rescued a starving dog from a trap in the woods. Even after feeding it, it took weeks for the animal to trust him. But this girl was not an animal. She was a person from another world. And in her world, humans were monsters. Unseen to Jake, memories played in the alien girl's mind. Her people had shown her images, horrible ones, of giant creatures like him tearing apart smaller beings, hunting, trapping, devouring. Her science leaders had warned, "If the human sees you, hide. If they catch you, it's over." And now, here she was, caught, in a human den, given food. What if this was just the first step? In her species, it was common to tenderize prey, by feeding it first, fattening it slowly, making it comfortable before the end. She had seen this done to creatures smaller than herself. Maybe this giant was doing the same to her. She looked down at the plate again. The fruit smelled sweet. Her stomach ached with hunger, but her fear was stronger. Jake stood up slowly and walked into the kitchen. She tensed, ready to run, but stayed still. He came back not with weapons, but with something surprising, a toy. It was a small carved, wooden bird. Jake had made it months ago out of boredom. He wound it up gently, placed it on the floor between them, and stepped back. The little toy flapped its wings and rolled forward, making soft clicking sounds. The girl's eyes widened in shock. This wasn't a trap. It wasn't bait. It was a gift. Her fingers slowly peeked out from the blanket. She reached for the toy, then paused, looked at Jake, and hesitated. He smiled softly and said, "It's yours." She didn't understand the words, but she felt something shift. This was not how a predator acted. She picked up the toy and turned it in her hands. It was harmless, strange, delicate. A moment passed, and then another, and finally for the first time her lips moved in a word Jake didn't understand. It sounded like cheetar, perhaps a name or a word from her language. Jake repeated it clumsily. "Cheetar?" She blinked and stared at him, stunned that he tried to speak her tongue. Jake laughed softly and tapped his own chest. "Jake." She stared at him, then back at the toy, then at the fruit. And finally, after hours of silence and suspicion, she took a bite. It was the tiniest bite, but for her it was a step out of fear. Jake didn't cheer or move too fast. He stayed still, smiling a little. "That's better," he said softly. She didn't respond with words, but she didn't hide either. For now, she would still watch him carefully. But something in her heart whispered a new possibility. Maybe this human doesn't want to eat me. Maybe he wants to understand me. Her kind had warned her about humans. The morning light was soft through the cabin window. The fire had gone out hours ago, but the warmth still lingered in the small space. The tiny alien girl, still wrapped in the large human blanket, sat alone now. Jake had left quietly to collect firewood. He didn't lock the door. He didn't leave any traps. He simply said, "I'll be back soon," and walked into the woods. She had expected chains, or a cage, or some kind of machine to keep her from escaping. But instead, she sat on a soft bed with food in reach, her little wooden toy beside her, and no one watching her. It made no sense. She slid off the bed carefully, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. Her body still hurt, weak from the crash, but her mind was alert. She moved slowly around the cabin, studying it. On the walls were strange pictures, drawings, made by hand. Some showed animals with big teeth, some showed trees and stars. But one picture stopped her cold. It was a drawing of her, sleeping, curled up in the blanket. He had drawn her. She stared at it, unsure what it meant. In her culture, drawing another being without permission was offensive. But the way he had drawn her, it wasn't mocking, it looked peaceful, gentle. She looked around again, finding more odd things. Tools for cooking, for repairing machines, soft books with symbols she didn't understand. Everything felt ordinary. Too ordinary for a monster's home. Her kind had told her humans were savage, that they ruled by fear, that they destroyed what they didn't understand. The elders had shown her terrifying footage, tall beasts in armor setting fire to forests, breaking machines, dragging away the weak. They called it the Earth Protocol, total removal of threats. And yet, here she was, alone in the very den of such a beast. And he hadn't hurt her. He hadn't even touched her without care. Still, her instinct screamed, don't trust him. Maybe he was clever. Maybe this was the long game. Let the prey feel safe, then strike. She spotted something across the room. A small communication unit. It was half covered in tools, dusty, but her sharp eyes caught the faint blink of a standby light. She ran to it and pressed a glowing node behind her ear. A soft pulse, a neural sync. The device hummed to life. She accessed her stored protocol, calls for emergency help, escape routes, even codes to contact off-world units. But when she sent out a signal, nothing. No reply. Just static. Her heart pounded. She tried again. Different code. A different beacon. Still nothing. She froze. Were they ignoring her, or worse, had they already decided she was gone? Just then, the cabin door creaked open. She jumped back, her tiny body hidden behind a chair. Her dagger was in her hand, a glowing needle-shaped weapon that could burn through stone. Jake stepped in, snow on his boots, carrying firewood. He looked around and saw the empty bed. His eyes widened in panic for a second, but then he spotted her behind the chair. She was holding the weapon, ready to strike. Jake didn't reach for anything, he didn't run. He raised his hands and said calmly, "Easy. I'm not your enemy." She stood frozen. The dagger glowed brighter in her palm. He took one slow step forward. "If I was going to hurt you, I would have done it already." That was true. She had been unconscious, helpless. He could have dissected her, sold her, delivered her to her enemies. Instead, he had made her a bed, left food, drawn her. She lowered the dagger just a little. Jake didn't move. His voice softened. "I don't know what you've seen," he said, "but I'm not like that." She stared at him, heart racing. She couldn't understand every word, but she understood the tone. Gentle, tired, honest. She let the dagger fall to her side, and then something inside her broke. A small wall of fear, one brick shaken loose. She whispered a single word in her language, barely louder than breath. "Why?" Jake tilted his head. "Why what?" She pointed to herself, then to him, then again to herself. Jake smiled faintly. "Because no one deserves to be alone. Not even little aliens who crash into my backyard." She blinked. She didn't fully understand, but she felt something she had never expected to feel in the hands of a human. Safety. They came looking for her and wanted her dead. Snow began to fall again. That evening, soft flakes drifting down from a gray sky. The forest outside was silent, as if holding its breath. Inside the wooden cabin, warmth and peace covered the room like a blanket. The tiny alien girl sat on the windowsill, wrapped in her oversized blanket, legs pulled to her chest. Jake sat, nearby, fixing a broken lantern, his tools scattered across the table. Neither spoke much. Words weren't needed. The girl, who had finally told Jake her name was Nari, wasn't trembling anymore. She even allowed herself to eat in front of him now. Slowly, painfully, trust had started to bloom like a tiny flower in snow. But that flower was about to be crushed. As night came, Nari stood suddenly. Her ears, small and leaf-like, twitched. She stepped down from the sill and looked up at the ceiling. Jake noticed her change. "What is it?" he asked, setting his tools down. She didn't answer. Her eyes had gone cold. She whispered something in her language, short, sharp, full of fear. Jake walked to the window. At first he saw nothing, but then a beam of white light cut through the sky. It wasn't lightning. It wasn't a plane. It was a ship. Silent, metallic, triangular, and it was landing in the middle of the forest clearing just beyond the tree line. A dark vessel, humming with energy. Blue lights flickered along its edges like veins. It hovered for a moment. Then, dropped to the ground with a dull thud. Jake grabbed his jacket and opened a drawer under the counter. Inside was an old rifle and a flare gun. He wasn't a soldier, but he had lived too long in the wild not to prepare for danger. Nari ran to him, eyes wide. "No," she said in a shaking voice. "No fight. Hide." But Jake had already stepped, outside. He didn't go far. Just stood at the edge of his porch watching the shadows move in the trees, and then they came. 3 tall figures stepped into view. Not like Nari. These aliens were warriors. Their armor was black and gold, their eyes hidden behind glowing visors. Their steps were perfect, silent, trained, deadly. They didn't knock. They didn't ask questions. The one in front raised a palm and spoke in clear, robotic English. "Surrender the escaped unit immediately. She is classified as a living threat to galactic order." Jake didn't move. "She's not a threat," he replied calmly. "She's just a girl." The soldier took a step forward. "She carries restricted data, biological and cultural contamination. Her existence is illegal. Her deletion is authorized." Jake's grip on the rifle tightened. "She's not a file. She's a person." Inside the cabin, Nari stared through the cracks in the door. Her heart was pounding. They hadn't come to save her. They had come to erase her. She wasn't just an alien runaway. She was something far more dangerous to her own people. A mistake. A liability. She had always known that if they found her, they wouldn't bring her home. They would silence her. Forever. One of the soldiers raised a weapon. Jake didn't wait. He fired the flare gun, not at them, but into the sky, blinding them for a moment with the burst of red light. Then he pulled Nari through the back door of the cabin. "Run!" he shouted. They sprinted into the trees, snow crunching beneath their feet. Nari ran as fast as she could, her tiny legs barely keeping up, but Jake didn't leave her behind. He scooped her up and held her tight as he pushed through the woods. Behind them, the sound of alien boots and weapons echoed. Energy blasts lit up the forest. Trees exploded in sparks. Branches fell. But Jake kept going, heart pounding, arms around Nari like a shield. They didn't stop until they reached a hidden cave he had used once during a winter storm. It was small, but dry and deep. Jake placed Nari down and sat beside her, breathing hard. Her eyes were wide with terror. "I told you," she whispered. "They don't come to help. They come to erase." Jake looked at her. "Then we won't let them." She blinked. "We?" He nodded. "You're not alone anymore." She stared at him in the dark. This human, this giant, this stranger who could have left her, now ran through fire just to protect her. Her kind had warned her about humans, but they had never warned her that a human could be better than her own people. The human didn't run. He fought for her. The cave was cold, but quiet. Jake sat with his back against the stone wall, holding a deep gash on his shoulder. Blood had soaked through his sleeve. Nari crouched beside him, her tiny hands glowing faintly as she tried to stop the bleeding with the glowing medical thread from her suit. Her movements were fast and shaky. She was scared, but not of him anymore. She was scared for him. "You shouldn't have fought them," she whispered. "They will not stop. They don't forgive." Jake winced but smiled through it. "Yeah? Well, neither do I." Outside, the night had swallowed the forest. Snowflakes drifted silently across the dark trees, but behind that peace was a deadly silence. The alien enforcers were still out there, hunting, watching, waiting for Jake and Nari to come out. Nari leaned her forehead against his arm, the one not bleeding. "I was never supposed to escape," she whispered. "I carry the future of my people, secrets they don't want anyone to know. If they lose me, their lives fall apart." Jake looked down at her, breathing slowly. "Then we don't let them win." "But you're human," she said, voice cracking. "You don't have weapons. You don't have a ship. You don't even have armor." Jake chuckled dryly. "No, but I have a chainsaw, a generator, and a really big grudge." He pulled his backpack toward him and opened it. Inside were basic tools, wires, batteries, an old motion sensor, gear he had used for years to survive alone. Useless in a galactic war, maybe, but not to Jake. Not tonight. Nari stared at him. "What are you doing?" Jake pulled out a map and pointed to a narrow ridge overlooking the clearing where the alien ship had landed. "If they want to chase us, let's make it interesting." An hour later, the soldiers were moving through the trees again. Their scanners blinked, tracking movement. Something fast, small, running just ahead. They moved as a unit, silent, deadly, professional. Then, one soldier stepped on something. Click. The trap exploded. A blast of light and sound hit the squad, throwing two of them into the snow. Jake's homemade stun bomb worked better than he thought. He didn't wait. He ran out from the ridge above, fired a flare straight into the command unit's visor, then pulled a wire. High in the trees, heavy snow dumped down in a controlled slide, burying part of the team. Nari, hiding in a snow-covered trench, used her tiny hands to send a coded virus into their tracking equipment. Her biosignature disappeared from their scanners. Panic spread through the soldiers' ranks. They hadn't expected resistance from a primitive human and a tiny fugitive. Jake stood above them, rifle ready, eyes wild. "She's not going anywhere. With you," one of the aliens shouted in their native tongue. "This is your last warning. Step aside or die." Nari rose from the trench, her violet eyes glowing. "No," she said clearly. "You leave, or I release the truth." They turned toward her, weapons raised. But then her hands lit up with swirling symbols. The data locked in her body, the secret DNA keys, the encrypted histories, began to glow and float in the air around her. "I have everything your empire tried to hide," she said. "If I die, it spreads." The soldiers hesitated. Jake stepped beside her. "Go ahead," he said, nodding at Nari. "Tell the galaxy, start the fire." One soldier lowered his weapon, then another. Then, without a word, they turned and vanished into the trees. The ship lifted off silently moments later, vanishing into the clouds like a ghost. Silence returned. Jake collapsed to one knee, breathing hard. Nari ran to him and touched his chest, her hand glowing as she tried to heal his wounds. "Why do you keep saving me?" she asked, tears in her glowing eyes. "I was scared of you. I thought you'd eat me." Jake smiled weakly. "I thought you'd kill me in my sleep. Guess we were both wrong." She climbed onto his lap, gently, wrapping her tiny arms around his neck. Her voice was small. "But you didn't run. You fought for me." Jake wrapped one arm around her, the other still holding his bleeding shoulder. "Next time," he whispered, "let's hope they bring cookies instead of weapons." They both laughed. And for the first time since she crashed, Nari truly believed something wild. Maybe this human was the safest place in the galaxy. The truth about Nari's mission, The snowstorm had passed. The sky was clear now, with stars stretched above the forest like glowing eyes watching silently. Jake and Nari sat inside the old cabin again, the fire crackling between them. Jake's arm was bandaged, thanks to Nari's glowing thread and her tiny healing tools. He still looked tired, but alive. Nari, wrapped in the same soft blanket, was quiet tonight. Not from fear, but from the weight of something she hadn't told him yet. Jake could feel it in the air. Something had changed after the fight. Something deeper than the wounds on his shoulder or the smoke trails left by alien weapons. It was in her silence, in the way she avoided his eyes. He set down his tea and leaned forward. "You've been holding back," he said gently. "You can trust me, Nari. Whatever it is, just say it." She looked up at him. Her violet eyes shimmered, not with fear, but with pain. "I was never meant to live long," she said slowly. Jake blinked. "What?" "I was made," she whispered. "Not born." She opened the small, glowing panel on her arm. A ring of symbols circled her wrist. More than language, more than data. It was a countdown. Designed. "Grown in a lab," she continued. "I am one of 3. Living data carriers. Our purpose was simple. Carry the truth of our people's history in our bodies. And when that truth was no longer needed, we were meant to self-destruct." Jake's face turned pale. "You mean, you're a bomb?" "No," she said softly. "Not like that. Just a shut-off. My body will begin to break down when the code inside reaches its destination, or if I'm captured." Jake stood up and began pacing. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "I didn't want to die knowing the only person who helped me would run away," she said. "But you didn't. You stayed. You fought. So now you deserve the truth." Jake sat back down, rubbing his face. "How much time do you have?" She looked down at the ring of symbols. "It depends. If the code remains locked, I have weeks, maybe months. But if it activates early..." Jake didn't let her finish. He stood up, grabbed one of her old tools, and examined it under the lamp. "Then we buy time, or stop the clock. I fixed old generators, broken drones, even built my own windmill. I'll figure this out." She gave a soft laugh. "You think you can hack alien genetic code with human tools?" He raised an eyebrow. "You forget. I'm stubborn. That's one of our most dangerous human traits." Nari crawled across the table toward him, her small hand reaching for his. "If the code activates, I want to give it to you." Jake looked at her. "Why?" "Because you're the only being I've ever met who didn't want to use me." Jake kneeled beside her. "I don't want your data, Nari. I just want you to live." She smiled softly. "Then we try together." And in that moment, human and alien, giant and mini life form, they weren't just survivor and protector. They were partners, family, something new. Jake gently lifted her onto his shoulder and stood tall. "If your creators are watching," he said, "tell them this. Their little secret didn't just survive. She found a reason to fight back." Above them, stars blinked silently. But somewhere in the galaxy, hidden frequencies were shifting. Nari's data had stirred the ancient code. And someone, something, was listening. Not a pet, not a threat. But a partner. 3 days passed in silence. Nari's glowing countdown slowed, but it didn't stop. Despite Jake's best efforts with his human tools and patched-together alien tech, the code inside her body kept ticking forward, like a quiet voice whispering, "Time is running out." Jake didn't sleep much. He searched through every part of the pod she crashed in, examined every glowing panel, tried to trace every symbol. Nari stayed by his side, helping where she could, but deep down, she had accepted something he hadn't. She wasn't meant to last. But maybe, just maybe, she could leave something behind that would. That evening, as the sun bled across the snow-covered trees, Nari climbed onto Jake's workbench. He looked up, his eyes tired but still filled with fire. "We're close," he said, motioning to the open panel pulsing with alien light. "I think I found a way to freeze the decay." She shook her head. "It's okay," she said gently. "I don't want to freeze. I want to give." Jake froze. "I'm going to unlock the data," she said. "All of it. Not to save me, but to change everything." Jake stood. "Nari, if you do that—" "I know," she interrupted. "My body won't survive the release. But the truth will." She raised her tiny glowing hand and touched his chest over his heart. "I trust you." Jake's voice cracked. "I didn't save you so you could just disappear." "I'm not disappearing," she whispered. "I'm becoming something bigger." She stepped into the center of the cabin. The lights dimmed as the symbols on her arms, back, and forehead began to glow. Soft pulses of energy circled around her like rings of stars. The cabin filled with a low hum, one that reached past Earth, past satellites into deep space. And then she released it. A spiral of light exploded upward, carrying languages, maps, genetic patterns, political lies, histories that had been erased, stories never told. The truth of her people, hidden for centuries, now poured into the universe through every wave of energy. Jake watched, tears in his eyes, not from fear, but from awe. She wasn't breaking, she was shining. And in the final moment, Nari turned to him. She was glowing now, body almost see-through. "I was never made to live," she said, "but you gave me a life." Then with one last smile, she vanished, into light. Silence fell. Only the fire crackled. The wind whispered through the cracks in the cabin, and Jake stood alone, but not empty. In his chest, his neural link buzzed. He looked down. One of Nari's rings of data had embedded itself in his body. She had left a part of herself with him, her knowledge, her language, her spark. The next day, alien ships appeared in Earth's orbit. But they didn't fire. They didn't threaten. They played Nari's message, broadcast from satellites now carrying her truth. The galaxy listened, and everything changed. Jake became the first human ambassador to alien worlds. Not because of power or weapons, but because a tiny girl, once too scared to eat in front of him, had trusted his heart more than his size. They called him many things: the keeper of the light, the friend of the forgotten. But to Jake, she was never a tool or a mission or a threat. She was just Nari, not a pet, not a mistake, but a partner whose courage lit up the stars.